Think Harley builds big cruisers? Japan took that idea and cranked it into overdrive. These bikes packed engines so massive they bordered on madness. Some became icons, others total disasters. These weren't oversized for bragging rights. They were Japan's answer to American dominance, built for brutal torque, extreme displacement, and unapologetic engineering flex. From Kawasaki to Honda, they didn't just compete, they came to shape the foundation. Today, we're diving into the most outrageous, overpowered, and underrated engines ever jammed into a Japanese cruiser. Some were ahead of their time. Some were mechanical monsters. A few, complete chaos. If you love bikes with more grunt than sense, smash that like button and subscribe for deep dives that skip the hype and hit the metal. We drop new videos every week. Now let's get into it, because what Japan built wasn't just bold, it was downright unhinged. Cruising the Japanese way. Before we break down the engines, let's define what actually makes a Japanese cruiser. At its core, a cruiser has three key traits: a low-slung frame with laid-back geometry, a torque-heavy engine tuned for strong mid-range, and styling built around long-distance comfort and muscle road attitude. But when we say Japanese cruiser, we're not just talking about looks or feel, we mean bikes designed and built by Japan's Big Four: Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki. These brands didn't just enter the cruiser market, they helped shape it, especially from the 80s onward. This video focuses on the heavy hitters, typically anything with an engine bigger than 1,500cc. Sure, there are smaller Japanese cruisers out there, but today we're talking about the big displacement machines built to take on Harley-Davidson in raw size and street presence. And yes, some of these bikes were assembled outside Japan or rebranded for export, but the design, the engineering, the DNA, that's all Japanese. Now that we've set the ground rules, let's see how Japan stepped into the muscle cruiser war and why they didn't tiptoe in. Muscle made in Japan. For decades, the heavyweight cruiser scene was Harley's playground. Loud V-twins, loads of chrome, and a whole lot of attitude. If you wanted big torque and laid-back style, there was only one badge that mattered. But in the 1990s, Japan stepped in, and they weren't there to copy. They came to challenge. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki saw a booming market and a golden opportunity. Harley couldn't keep up with growing demand, and the Big Four were ready to fill that gap. But instead of cloning Milwaukee metal, they brought their own playbook, loaded with innovation. While Harley held on to air-cooled motors and carbs, Japan pushed forward with liquid cooling, fuel injection, and overhead cams. Their cruisers were faster, smoother, and often more reliable right out of the showroom. Look at Honda's early Magna and Shadow models, V4s and V-twins with shaft drives, hydraulic valves, and solid engineering. Yamaha's Virago line introduced features like electronic ignition and monoshock rear suspension before Harley even blinked. Japanese engineers weren't chasing, they were leading with their own take on what a cruiser could be. Then came the escalation. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Japan wasn't just matching Harley's size, they were blowing past it. These weren't gimmicks. They were serious contenders engineered to dominate. And while they didn't always win the showroom battle, they changed the cruiser game. Japan didn't follow Harley, they redefined what muscle meant on two wheels, and for a moment, they looked ready to steal the throne. The Titans of Torque. When Japan stepped into the muscle cruiser scene, they didn't play it safe. They came in swinging. These weren't just motorcycles. They were torque-loaded monsters engineered to challenge everything Harley stood for. Japan wasn't imitating, they were innovating and sometimes overpowering. Honda lit the fuse in 2001 with the VTX 1800, which stayed in production until 2008. It was their biggest cruiser to date, 1,795 cubic centimeters of liquid-cooled muscle. But this wasn't raw aggression for the sake of it. Honda gave it fuel injection, 3-valve cylinder heads, and a shaft drive, all tuned for smooth, seamless torque. It was fast, refined, and rock-solid, an engineering flex wrapped in timeless styling. Kawasaki answered in 2004 with the Vulcan 2000, a bike so massive it still holds the title for the largest Japanese production V-twin ever built. At 2,053 cubic centimeters, this beast delivered 141 foot-pounds of torque at just 3,000 revolutions per minute. It ran from 2004 to 2010 and had the presence of a freight train. With towering cylinders and a deep, thunderous idle, it didn't just demand attention, it took it. And with only a 5-speed gearbox, it had a classic mechanical feel that somehow made it even more intimidating. Yamaha followed suit with the Star Series, starting in 2006. The Roadliner, Stratoliner, and especially the Raider, which ran until 2017, shared a 1,854 cubic centimeter air-cooled V-twin. But what made these bikes stand out wasn't just displacement, It was design. They featured lightweight aluminum frames, belt drives, and clean sculpted lines that looked as good as they rode. The Raider, in particular, balanced old-school attitude with new-school agility. Muscle cruiser meets performance art. And then there was Suzuki, with the wild card, the Boulevard M109R, launched in 2006 and still in production today. With a 1,783 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin, dual overhead cams, and a sport bike-like short-stroke layout, it cranked out 127 horsepower, more than any of its Japanese rivals. It was fast, loud, and unapologetically aggressive, especially with that fat 240mm rear tire putting power to the pavement. Suzuki didn't just build a cruiser, they built a weapon. These bikes weren't just about matching Harley's muscle, they were about redefining what big cruisers could be. Japan didn't follow, they forged their own path, and for a moment, it felt like they could take the crown. If these bikes take you back to open roads, late nights in the garage, or that first ride that changed everything, you're not alone. Tap that like button if you've ever fallen for a machine with more heart than sense. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories, the history, and the horsepower that still matter. Forgotten giants. Not every Japanese cruiser with a massive engine became a household name. Some were technical marvels, machines with power, innovation, and bold design that never found their audience. These are the forgotten giants. Not because they lacked muscle, but because the market didn't know what to make of them. Take the Honda Valkyrie Rune. Produced for just 2 short years between 2004 and 2005. Born from the Goldwing's 1,832 cubic centimeter flat six, the Rune was less a motorcycle and more a sculpted concept brought to life. With spaceship styling, a single-sided swing arm, and a trailing link front fork, it looked like something from a sci-fi garage. It produced around 125 foot-pounds of torque and 118 horsepower, wrapped in nearly 900 pounds of chrome and drama. But with an MSRP north of $25,000, which was a stack of serious cash in 2004, most riders weren't sure if they were buying a cruiser, a museum piece, or an expensive design experiment. The result? Commercial failure. It was too bold, too pricey, and too ahead of its time. But over the years, the Rune has transformed into a cult icon, rare, misunderstood, and deeply cherished by the few who truly get it. And how can we forget the Kawasaki Mean Streak? A 1,552 cubic centimeter V-twin bruiser aimed at riders who wanted both muscle and handling. With inverted forks, twin disc brakes, and aggressive styling, it looked ready to rip down a drag strip. It made solid torque and had the kind of chassis balance rarely seen in cruisers at the time. But it landed in a strange no man's land, not quite fast enough to rival the M109R, not quite traditional enough to lure Harley buyers. Sales never took off, and it quietly disappeared after 2008. These bikes had the power, the tech, and sometimes even revolutionary design, but timing, pricing, or plain market confusion kept them from ever reaching their full potential. Coming up, what made these engines special beneath the chrome, and why the era of monster Japanese cruisers began to fade. Inside the machine. Beneath the chrome and cruiser bravado, these Japanese muscle bikes weren't just about looks or loud pipes. They were engineering showcases. Each manufacturer brought a distinct philosophy to what a big engine meant, and the results were anything but one size fits all. Let's start with how they made their power. The Suzuki M109R ran an over-square engine, meaning the bore was wider than the stroke. At 112mm by 90.5mm, this configuration let it rev higher, delivering a punchy, horsepower-rich power band. It didn't feel like a traditional cruiser, it felt like a sport bike in disguise. Now contrast that with the Kawasaki Vulcan 2000, undersquare with a massive 103mm bore and a long 123.2mm stroke. The result? A torque monster that made power low and early with a redline that barely cleared 5,000 RPM. It was all grunt, all the time. Others, like the Yamaha Raider, found a middle ground, balancing revs and torque to deliver smooth, usable power across the band. No two bikes felt the same, even when the specs looked similar. Then there's layout. Most cruisers in this era stuck with the time-tested V-twin. Narrow, muscular, full of character. It offered that signature rumble and engine-breaking cruiser riders love. But Honda went a different direction with the Valkyrie Rune. The Rune's flat six engine, borrowed from the Goldwing, was a smooth, balanced powerhouse. It didn't thump, it flowed. It lacked the visceral feel of a V-twin, but delivered highway smoothness that felt almost electric. where the V-twin growled, the flat six purred. Cooling systems told another story. Air-cooled engines like the one in Yamaha's Raider stayed true to the old-school formula. Fewer parts, simpler design, and a rugged look. But with stricter emissions and urban riding demands, heat became an issue. And that's where liquid-cooled cruisers like the VTX 1800 and M109R pulled ahead. These engines ran cooler, handled emissions more effectively, and could be pushed harder due to tighter tolerances and higher compression ratios. Reliability, almost universally excellent, but not without quirks. The VTX 1800 was bulletproof, but adjusting its 3-valve heads was a time-consuming job. The M109R, with its aggressive tuning and sport bike DNA, had a reputation for chewing through rear tires and clutches faster than most. Fuel systems also evolved. In the 90s, carburetors were the norm, but by the mid-2000s, fuel injection took over, bringing better cold starts, smoother throttle response, and cleaner emissions. Riders appreciated the performance gains, though it made DIY tuning a little trickier. These weren't oversized engines for bragging rights, they were rolling test labs. Some clung to tradition, others pushed the envelope. But all of them proved one thing. Japan didn't just build big cruisers, they engineered them to the core. More cubes, more problems. On paper, giant engines sound like a dream. Earth-shaking torque, that signature rumble, and enough displacement to make any Harley blush. But here's the reality. Bigger doesn't always mean better. Start with the torque. Bikes like the Vulcan 2000 and VTX 1800 could launch like freight trains in first gear. But in day-to-day riding, that much grunt can be hard to manage. In traffic or on tight urban roads, all that low-end torque becomes twitchy to the uninitiated. You're either slipping the clutch or lurching forward, and that smooth cruiser ride turns into a chore. And then, there's the weight. These bikes weren't just big, they were massive. The Vulcan 2000 fully fueled tipped the scales at over 820 pounds. Add a rider, gear, maybe a passenger, and you're flirting with 1,000 pounds of rolling steel. That kind of heft makes slow-speed control feel more like wrestling than riding. They look killer parked at bike night, but try navigating a U-turn in a gas station, and you'll start questioning your life choices. But the real pressure came from somewhere else: emissions. Most of these engines were tuned for torque rather than efficiency. As emission standards tightened in the 2010s, these power plants became harder to justify. They ran hotter, they guzzled gas. Even with fuel injection, meeting modern EPA standards became a major headache. Fuel economy, 30 miles per gallon on a good day. At the same time, riders' expectations started to shift. Buyers wanted lighter, smarter, more manageable bikes. Tech features like ride modes and cruise control began to matter more than raw displacement. And as bikes like the Rebel 1100, Indian Scout, and Sportster S rolled out with improved weight balance and modern technology, the torque wars started to feel outdated. The truth is, these big engine bruisers were built for a different era, and while they still turn heads, they no longer fit the needs or the wants of most modern riders. The modern era. So, where did they all go? The golden era of Japanese muscle cruisers, those 1,800cc torquey heavy beasts, has quietly come to an end. And the reason? It's not about style, it's about emissions. Starting in the 2010s, new global regulations began tightening the screws. Europe's Euro standards, California's air quality rules. Suddenly, it wasn't enough for a bike to sound good or feel powerful, it had to be clean, efficient, and quiet. And that spelled trouble for air-cooled big-bore V-twins built around raw output and old-school design. The fixes weren't simple or cheap. Engineers faced the task of redesigning entire engines, exhaust systems, and fuel maps just to meet compliance. And for bikes that were already struggling to sell, it just didn't make sense to keep investing. So, one by one, they disappeared. The Honda VTX 1800, gone by 2008. Kawasaki Vulcan 2000, discontinued in 2010. Yamaha's Raider and Stratoliner, phased out by 2017. The Royal Star Venture, retired in favor of newer touring platforms with modern emissions tech. And now, only one stands alone. The Suzuki Boulevard M109R, still in production as of 2025. With its liquid-cooled DOHC V-twin, it was built ahead of the curve, and it's the only survivor of Japan's muscle era that's still roaring off the showroom floor. It managed what the others couldn't: high performance and compliance. So, are Japanese brands still building big cruisers? Technically, yes, but just barely. The muscle wars are over. The giants have fallen. In their place, a new generation of bikes, smaller, smarter, more efficient. Machines like the Rebel 1100, the Yamaha Bolt, and others designed for a new kind of rider. They're fun, sure, but They're not the chrome-plated beasts we remember. Riding into tomorrow. So now that most of Japan's big-bore cruisers have vanished, will they ever come back? The honest answer? Not like they used to. The motorcycle industry is evolving fast. Emission standards are tighter than ever. Fuel economy, noise limits, and environmental impact are shaping everything from engine design to exhaust systems. And rider demand? It's shifting toward leaner, smarter, more tech-forward machines. We're entering a new phase, one that's less about cubic inches and more about ride modes, torque curves, and integrated tech. Electric platforms are starting to surface. Honda and Yamaha are already working behind the scenes on EV concepts with cruiser DNA, long wheelbases, relaxed ergonomics, and that unmistakable stance. They don't roar like a V-twin, but the torque is instant, and the ride, effortless. At the same time, the retro wave is still going strong, especially in Asia. Bikes like the Honda Rebel 1100 and Yamaha Bolt are thriving, thanks to their blend of classic style and modern engineering. And while Japan's domestic market has cooled on big V-twins, bikes like the M109R continue to sell in small numbers to dedicated fans around the world. Will we ever see another 2,000cc Japanese cruiser with a 5-speed and fender skirts? Probably not. But a new generation of power cruisers, electric, efficient, and retro-inspired? That's not just possible, it's coming. The era of raw displacement is winding down, but the spirit of the Japanese cruiser, the obsession with balance, performance, and design, could find new life in ways we haven't seen yet. And maybe, just maybe, one of the big four will surprise us. Not by repeating history, but by rewriting it again. Up next, one final thought to wrap it all up, and a question only you can answer. So now that we've toured the wild side of Japan's muscle cruiser era, what stuck with you? Was it the raw, unstoppable torque of the Vulcan 2000? Still the biggest Japanese V-twin ever put in a production bike? The sleek aggression of the M109R, a muscle cruiser with a sport bike soul? Or the surreal, futuristic elegance of the Valkyrie Rune, a machine so overbuilt it never stood a chance? These weren't just motorcycles. They were engineering statements, loud, proud, and unapologetically excessive. But now it's your turn to weigh in. Would you ride one of these torque titans, or is 2,000cc of V-twin madness more than any rider really needs? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know which one you'd ride and which one you'd leave behind. And if you like this deep dive, hit that like button. And if you want more no-fluff motorcycle content every week, tap subscribe and ring the bell. In the next video, we're digging into an engine that broke all the rules, dazzled engineers, and still failed to survive. A warning shot and a missed opportunity. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Ride safe, ride smart, and as always, keep wrenching.